Hi, everybody. My name is William George. So as Federico said, I'm the research lead at Kleros. I've been thinking about these questions around decentralized justice for 7 years now. My background is as a mathematician, so I think a lot about different research questions related to Kleros that can be mathematically modeled, but particularly like mechanism design and game theory questions. So I think to begin, it's helpful to recall what cryptoeconomics is. So Kleros and decentralized justice, at least as it is implemented by Kleros, are built out of this combination of game theory and blockchains, computer science, and economics. People throw around this like new buzzword in that space called cryptoeconomics. And what do I mean when we talk about that? Like, do we have a new field here? Are there intrinsically new tools? What is this? So I would define this to be a form of economics where the set of actions that are available to the actors is defined by cryptography. So you can sign a message or not. You can publish a block or not. But you can't forge a signature unless you break some cryptographic primitive, some like cryptographic signature scheme. And this is different from previous domains in which you could do mechanism design before, where if you were like a government or a large business, you could create laws and policy, and you could force choices on people. It's like, okay, you can do this or this because that's what the law allows you to do. And you can have different incentives around those choices. But here, this is more democratic because anybody can launch a smart contract on a blockchain that will have these economic incentives built in. They're then enforced by these cryptoeconomic ideas. So that seems very freeing. It's like, like everybody can be sort of like a mechanism designer now. And that's true to an extent. However, it's a challenging space to work in. In some ways, it's more challenging than the centralized, like past institutions, governments, and large businesses, for a variety of reasons. Basically, there are lots of attacks. And you have to, it's a very attack-rich space. I don't know if you people read the news about cryptocurrency and blockchains, but there are constantly, like such and such protocol got hacked, such and such protocol suffered a 51% attack, like somebody stole a key, somebody lost their key, like all kinds of attack concerns you need to take into consideration. This slide is a little messed up in that like my payoff matrix here is kind of duplicated, but whatever, it's more or less readable. So the first reason I would say that's true, there are several reasons, is because it's very difficult to control the external incentives of the actors. Okay, I can launch a smart contract that gives people incentives. You do this, you receive cryptocurrency, you do that, you lose cryptocurrency. But somebody else can launch another smart contract that you can make calls between that automatically execute so that you either interact with both contracts or neither of them. So for example, you could do something where it's like, okay, I've built some kind of price oracle into Kleros, into a decentralized dispute resolution system where somebody like, price oracle was another blockchain application that tries to determine the price of some crypto asset. Maybe it uses some kind of financial data or something to do that. And that will also have some kind of cryptoeconomic game that its users are going to participate in determining like what is the price of cryptocurrency A in terms of British pounds. They play a game. It has some incentives under maybe like the incentives in this protocol kind of table here. And then Kleros is interacting with it, and someone can try to warp the incentives of the price oracle game because they have some vested interest in Kleros. Or vice versa, maybe, depending on how the interactions go. So you, as the mechanism designer that designed the price oracle, you have some payoff matrix. You're like, okay, I'm a good mechanism designer. I have equilibrium here. Rational actors are going to do this, and then completely unbeknownst to you, there is some other phenomenon that people are interacting with without even having to take the risk that they interact with one thing and the other thing they don't get to the other thing in time that you might have in the real world where you're trying to coordinate logistically between some different aspects of some scheme that you have. The thing will execute or not, and you will either be able to manipulate or you just your transaction doesn't do anything. So then the real payoff table is the thing at the bottom where there's a completely different equilibrium than what you initially anticipated. Another reason that there are lots of attack risks is that there are very limited identity tools, at least historically, in this space. I have this famous comic here about on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. like identity tools are improving in the blockchain space, but like traditionally, years ago, basically the only notion of identity that people had was their address, which is essentially the private key they have. They could use to sign messages. If you're not familiar with sort of these cryptographic primitives, basically it's just like a stamp. It's a series of characters that you have that allows you to make transactions that say, okay, please spend this cryptocurrency here, like do this contract call, and nobody else should be able to do those transactions unless they have your private key. And that is a very basic notion of identity, but it's very limited in that anybody can create a bunch of new private keys at zero cost. So there's nothing preventing someone from just creating thousands of identities. And it's like as the mechanism designer, you have to remember, okay, like just because I have two different addresses doesn't mean I have two different people. And as you have newer, more recent identity protocols, like you can get some guarantees in that sense, but they're still kind of limited. And then finally, the other sort of big reason I think there are lots of attackers is that there's a no central operator, which is by design in the blockchain space. As Frederick was talking about the sort of origins of Bitcoin, people wanted to have a currency that didn't involve having a central bank, which is a very sort of libertarian, idealistic, like we're going to organize our own currency without the man like controlling it. And, you can want that or not. That could be a priority for you or not. But when you sort of zoom out and you say, okay, like what can I do with this technology? Or I can try to like organize people in ways that don't require central actors. That's very useful in that it creates a lot of like opportunities for peer-to-peer interactions, new kinds of economic opportunities where you can just sort of organize among yourself across national lines without having to get some institution that has resources to like set something up to facilitate you. And so it's a chance. In decentralized justice, it is particularly relevant to try to have a system that doesn't have a central actor, because if you have a central actor that is making the decisions on your disputes, it's very easy to fall into conspiracies around how they made their decisions. Even if you have lots of transparency, if at the end of the day, Bob is making the decisions on your disputes, or like a company Bob is running is making decisions on your disputes, people are going to be like, oh, yeah, Bob didn't listen to me. Maybe Bob is corrupt. Whereas in the decentralized justice system, like the users are the only people making the decisions. You can participate. You can see for yourself. It's a transparent process where you can engage in this, and there's nobody else to blame. The other users maybe, but like there's no one who has more power than you. So that's a huge advantage of decentralized justice. But the fact that you don't have a centralized operator means that there's nobody to sort of like fix things if things go wrong. There's no one to like, they can like just sort of subjectively look at the system and be like, there's a weird voting pattern there. I'm gonna like remove this person's voting rights. Or no, like this case like clearly resolved incorrectly. I'm going to put it up to another voting round. You have to build those things in advance. The system, needs to be smart enough to recognize stuff like that without a human being that has like, admin control being able to do it for themselves. Okay. So Federico already described sort of how Kleros works, how decentralized justice as Kleros has implemented it works. You have some kind of economic interaction. Alice, the small business owner, hires Bob, the freelancer. They interact via an interface that looks like this. If they have a dispute, we have some crowd of participants. Some of them might be randomly chosen to judge a case. And then kind of what are the mechanisms that are taking place here? So the sort of big aspects of this are how do I pick the people, and then how do they vote, and how are they incentivized for how they vote? There are some other aspects, but those are sort of the big building blocks, and I'll go through them over the next few slides. So I'll come back to how people are selected, but just first talking about how people vote. So in Kleros 1.0, it's possible to have non-binary disputes where you have more than two possible outcomes. It's not necessarily like designed for that, because you can imagine, so if you only have two possible disputes, Alice, Bob, whoever wins a vote between the two of them has to have over half of the vote. So you can use a plurality voting system or a system called first past the post, and you know that like there has to be a big consensus around whoever got the most votes because there's only two choices. So whoever got the most votes got more than half. If you have, and so as Federico described, this uses a logical focal points where people can coordinate around like the option that sort of makes sense to them. So I only have the two choices. I have to pick one of the two, and then I'm incentivized to agree with how the other people vote. And when I imagine how they're thinking about this case, like the idea is that we're all going to gravitate towards this like distinguished solution that seems special or relevant somehow. This was the idea of Thomas Schelling. His example of like a focal point in real life was that if you try to meet somebody, but you don't know where and you don't know when, say you're trying to meet someone in New York City tomorrow, but you don't know the place or the time, he found empirically that people would meet each other at Grand Central Station at the information desk at noon. Why? Well, you could sort of meet each other at any time, at any place, it's sort of in New York City tomorrow. Why is like Grand Central Station at noon better than any other choice? And it's just because it's kind of special. People think of Grand Central Station as like a meeting place. People think of noon as a distinguished time. And then the similar idea in decentralized justice is that the honest answer to a question, when you're faced with, particularly a yes or no question, should stand out. And I should expect it to be a distinguished choice. If I have three jurors and they're all thinking, okay, like who's right, Alice versus Bob, each one of them is going to analyze independently and maybe come to a conclusion, okay, like I think Alice is right, she has a better case. And then you expect the other jurors to also think that so that you can like collectively gather around this focal point. But then if you have more than two choices, you can get into problems. You can get into essentially vote splitting issues. Imagine that you have three similar honest choices, any one of which would be like a good resolution to your dispute, and you have one very different choice. Then like the very different choice could easily become an alternative focal point. It could become like an alternative Schelling point that the people will like gravitate around. Why? Well, because it's distinguished. It's distinguished from the three good choices. So that's a problem. And particularly, it reduces the barrier to attacks. If an attacker, they stake this token to give them a chance of being withdrawn as a juror, and there's this question about like, if I'm trying to manipulate the system, I pretend I have multiple identities, how many votes can I get? And particularly, can I get manipulate the system into getting more than half of the votes? I'll come back to this when I get to the juror selection part of the talk. But if the votes are split over the good choices, then I don't need half the votes. I only, particularly if I'm using a first past the post voting system, I only need more votes than the next best choice, or the best, honest choice. So there are relations here relate to the academic field of social choice theory. We're going to have a panel on that in the afternoon, where we're going to talk basically about the theory of voting systems. How, when you have political elections, people will say, okay, I want to vote for my member of parliament or something, and you can have vote splitting there too. Now you have similar issues, but in this slightly different context, and it's interesting how the theory compares and differs. You can use ranked ballots to deal with that, borrowing from this existing theory of having non-binary elections in political systems. So in political elections, there's this established field of a scholarship that shows that basically whenever you try to use ranked ballots or use some better voting system to get around the issues of vote splitting you have, weird things happen. There's a famous theorem called Arrow's impossibility theorem that basically shows that you have some kind of pathological behavior in any ranked ballot-based voting system in a very precise way. So it will turn out that we've proved similar theorems like that in decentralized justice if you try to rank choices. More on that later. Getting back now to how the jurors are selected. Okay, so who are these people? They're chosen from some pool of people. How do I choose them? I should have some kind of random selection process. In Kleros, as it exists, there's a kind of hierarchy of courts. So people will judge different kinds of cases. Like not everybody wants to judge exactly some kind of case. Maybe I have some case around insurance disputes, and I'm an expert on that. And I don't want to be judging the freelancing, like online commerce stuff. So the way that we handle that is people stake into a different court, and then you're selected based on like what court you're staked into for the disputes that you handle. So that sort of makes sense. But then in any given court, the way people are selected is based on this token weighting selection. So as Federico said, you stake a token, and that gives you a certain chance of being drawn. And specifically in Kleros V1, your chance of being drawn on any given draw is proportional to the number of tokens you stake. So if you have 45% of the token, you have a 45% chance of being drawn every time a juror is picked in that court. If there's a second draw, you have a 45% chance again. Like you might get more than one vote. Every time you have a 45% chance of being drawn, and then you can like run the numbers here, and you can say, okay, with this like person with 45% of chance of being drawn at each draw has a 42.5 overall chance of getting 2 out of 3 spots and sort of taking over the jury. Why don't we just remove the person once they're drawn, you might ask? Well, this gets to the like lack of identity systems. If you could remove an address from being drawn again, but nothing prevents people from just splitting up their tokens over multiple addresses, because again, an address doesn't necessarily equal a human being. So if you do that, the people that are honest are probably going to have all their tokens on one address, and they'll be removed when they get drawn. But the people that are dishonest are just going to split up their tokens, and they're going to have, if anything, like an extra advantage. So instead of doing that, we just have you can get multiple draws, same chance each time. And this has a certain resistance to people taking over the court, because you need essentially half of the overall stake to have a good chance of taking over to get the majority of votes on any given draw. If the like panel of jurors is big enough, you can prove this using the law of large numbers from statistics. A main category of attacks that we think a lot about, there are many attacks that we worry about, but particularly on this like juror selection process, we think a lot about what we call 51% attacks, or sometimes whale attacks. And the name 51% attack is inspired by vocabulary in the world of proof of consensus algorithms from blockchains, the like proof of work in Bitcoin or proof of stake in Ethereum, where they have similar questions around people taking over the production of their blocks. There are actually very interesting parallels between how Kleros works and how those consensus algorithm works that are potentially interesting to you as mechanism designers, and that if you prove theorems about one, you often prove theorems about the other. For us, it's essentially how I design my system. What is the risk of someone taking more than half of the votes so that they control the jury? What do they need to do in order to get that? And in terms of improving the identity systems that are available in the blockchain space, one big advance that has been sort of worked on by Kleros itself, the Kleros Cooperative developed this online registry. It's kind of a proto-social network that we call Proof of Humanity. It's supposed to be a proof of personage tool or a civil resistance tool, with the idea being that each person should only be able to get one address on this registry. So now for each person, they have like a profile with their like photo and a small video and an Ethereum address. Whereas before I said, it's like you don't necessarily have any guarantees that one person has one Ethereum address. Here the idea is that you should only have one person per one Ethereum address. And the idea is that when you submit a new element to this registry, people can challenge you. If they notice that you're already on the registry, they'll place a deposit, and the dispute between you and the person who challenged you is decided by a Kleros jury. And then if you're rejected, that challenger gets rewarded. This actually has sort of deviating slightly from my point that I'll get back to about the jury selection. This is sort of interesting parallels to historical precedents of financialized prosecution. It's a little weird to think like in like a system like the UK where your prosecutors are public employees that are going and finding criminals. Like most modern justice systems have this practice. And here, like the sort of prosecutors in my Proof of Humanity page, where there's like random members from the crowd that are finding crime and flagging it for the system, the jury system, to resolve. But actually, like historically, there are like examples in the real world of people that did private prosecution. Saga's era Iceland had not only prosecution but also enforcement was privatized, which is interesting. There were various periods in English history where people were like there were no public prosecutors or essentially no public prosecutors, and prosecution was done by random people in exchange for like financial rewards. So like, you know, that can be better or worse than a system with professionalized prosecutors, but it's not like a completely crazy idea. We've noticed some interesting behavioral aspects about our sort of private prosecutors, of the people who are making challenges on this list, and that like often you've noticed sort of behavioral effects. You have like really highly engaged participants that go above and beyond like what the theory would predict them to do in terms of the rate of how frequently they're making challenges or like how big deposits they're making. And this can get to sort of questions in behavioral game theory. So-called strong reciprocators who are willing to take losses, you know, in extreme cases, in order to punish norm breakers in their community for social reasons, essentially. So that's something that we have observed on our lists. Okay, but now that you have this like proof of personhood tool, what can you do with it? Well, like you can remove someone from being drawn again if they get selected. So I have my attacker, he has 45% chance of being drawn on the first draw. He gets drawn, gone. He can't be drawn again. Great. Like each person is removed as they're drawn, and you have a 0% overall chance of getting more than what, you know, like an attacker that gets the majority of the vote. So, you know, now we've used an identity tool that has improved the security mechanism of our juror drawing. However, like one shouldn't get carried away. So like with humility, we developed proof of humanity. It's quite robust, you know, like we don't have reason to believe there are widespread people that have like tons of addresses, but ultimately it is not impossible to get more than one address. We've observed people that like hung out in like train stations and were like paying, like obviously paying people based on the submissions that were being made to make submissions on their behalf. So, you know, it's like you give someone 20 pounds or something and they sign up for proof of humanity and then you control their key. So now you have more than one profile. And you had two human beings there, but that wasn't really, you know, like they're controlled by the same person now, which was what you were trying to avoid. You know, particularly in like a low income country where, you know, maybe it's like weird that to try to get someone to like sign up for a social network from, you know, that's like a stranger that's offering you money. Maybe, you know, you wouldn't do that, but, you know, if someone offers you a day's wage, you know, there are people who will. So there's like an economic cost to getting on this list or getting a second address on this list. So it's not a perfect tool, but it adds resistance to get people getting more than one address. Then what happens if you have like an insecure proof of personhood tool? So I'm using the sort of token staking drawing again, like people's odds are determined by their percentage of their stake. But like once an address is picked, it's on proof of humanity, it's removed. And say the attacker has tons of addresses because they did the thing in the train station, and everybody else only has one. So the attacker gets drawn, he doesn't get removed because he has like 100 addresses. When Alice is drawn, she is removed. So the attacker's odds went up. So in some sense, like things got worse. And then the attacker's overall chance of being drawn with like this particular distribution of stake is 52% overall, even though he had slightly less than half to begin with. And basically what happened is you end up with a security model where either proof of personhood needs to be secure, in which case you're just gold. You know, people only have one address, great, you're done. Or the attacker shouldn't control too much of the percentage of the stake. Like, the security model is layered together in like kind of like a Swiss cheese kind of like defense model where, you know, the whole like you have layers of Swiss cheese and ideally the holes don't line up with each other. So like you put them together, you have there's no hole that goes through the whole thing. And this is how I at least think about how we should try to incorporate these identity mechanisms into Kleros juror selection or decentralized justice. In the hostile financialized world of blockchains, decentralized applications, lacking a central authority, you're never going to have like a perfect identities tool. But if you can layer together different identity tools that have different security models that complement each other, so that you have to like break everything to break the whole system, you can add a lot of robustness. So another idea that we've, to expand upon this, is to use what so-called soulbound tokens, which are like non-transferable crypto tokens. The idea is you have a token on your wallet that should say something about your identity. Maybe like a university or an online school gave you a degree. You took JavaScript programming courses from some online school. They issue a soulbound token, and because that's like part of your identity, you can't just like transfer it to somebody else. You can't send it to somebody else like a crypto token normally would be sent. And you can have different kinds of soulbound tokens. Maybe you won like some kind of contest and you got the trophy soulbound token. Maybe you took out a loan on a crypto loan platform and you didn't pay back, in which case you get the deadbeat soulbound token. And the idea, there's this, I don't think I have the, oh I do, a paper by Pooja Olhaver, Glenn Weil, and Vitalik Buterin that came out a couple of years ago where they talk about they pioneer this concept of soulbound tokens. They introduced this, where the idea is basically that like you shouldn't be too dystopian. It should be possible to get rid of your negative reputation, your deadbeat soulbound token, but at the expense of completely starting over your identity and like building anew. So you also have to throw away all of your good reputation. So in practice, people aren't going to do that except in extreme circumstances, and you wind up with kind of like an identity that's built up over time of like some good things, some bad things, like a complete and rich identity. If you have a mechanism where in order to be drawn as a juror, you need, say, one soulbound token or like a list of soulbound tokens you have to have all of, then it's a very similar security model to the proof of personhood thing. You are as weak as the weakest soulbound token or the token weighting thing. You have to break like all the soulbound tokens and have like a big chunk of the token, the like Kleros non-soulbound tokens in order to take over the system. I'm going to talk more about soulbound tokens we have a panel identity later today, but there's a lot of really interesting research questions around what happens if you have multiple soulbound tokens that are all kind of relevant. Like maybe I have disputes where like I want to have jurors that have some knowledge of JavaScript. I also want to have jurors that have some knowledge of Solidity, which is a programming language used for smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. Maybe I want to have people that are part of my community and have been to like important events. I don't think we're giving a soulbound token for this coming to this event, but if you want such a thing, maybe we can work it out. It's unrealistic to expect people to have all of those things, but you want like kind of weighting where people like have more or less chance depending on which soulbound tokens they have. And we're thinking about that. It's very active subject research, and more on that in the identity panel. Okay, so those are the two sort of big building blocks. How are the jurors drawn? How do they vote? More on both of those topics in the panels later. And then just to give you like a little more like sense of what kinds of attacks we're up to. We already talked about 51% attacks. There are a few other interesting things that give you kind of like an idea. There's a really interesting attack called the P plus epsilon attack. So this is a kind of bribe. Like you also have to worry about the jurors being bribed. How do you design the systems to be robust to that? And in particular, in a shelling point system, the system where people are incentivized to vote with the majority, which is how Kleros works, and realistically, it's the only, it's like the tool that seems to be available in a decentralized environment. There is a other like really interesting bribe that was, I think the name was coined in this blog article by Vitalik Buterin, who's one of the co-founders of Ethereum, way back in like 2015. If I'm not mistaken, he credits the idea to Andrew Miller, who's a professor at the University of Illinois. The idea is that basically you offer people a bribe where they will be rewarded in one of these focal point systems if they vote the way the attacker wants them to vote, but only if the attack fails, which is weird. So here, I have like similar to before, shelling point system. If you vote with you want to vote with the majority is X, I vote X, rewarded. Majority is Y, I vote Y, rewarded. And the attacker says, I want you to vote Y. Like, why is it good for me? I'm trying to get Y to pass. I realize that X is maybe the honest answer, but please vote for Y. And if you vote for Y, I'm going to give you a bribe. Or I'll give you what you would get if X wins, normally by voting for X, you would get a reward, and now because you voted with Y, you don't get that reward. I'll give you that reward, plus a little more. epsilon. And if you vote Y and Y wins, well, then you're rewarded anyway. I don't need to give you a reward. You already benefited. And then the idea here is that you have warped the incentive mechanism so that now voting Y is a dominant outcome. And the attacker can just like credibly claim, I'm going to have to do a people's epsilon attack. Vote with me and I'll pay you as long as I lose. And they don't lose because everybody votes for them because it's what's in their rational interest. And the attacker doesn't actually have to pay anything. So that's terrifying. We have thought a lot about how you should design the payoff structure of Kleros and other systems like this to at least make this attack like really hard. In the Kleros 1.0 payoff system, which we're going to keep elements of this in 2.0 as well. And the idea is that say you have M voters. Well, first of all, we require that people to have like a deposit. If they vote incorrectly, they lose something rather than just like losing the opportunity to gain something. And then moreover, what you have is that the rewards and the lost deposits are split. Like I realize like there's sort of math here that takes a minute to digest, but the main idea is that the reward that you're paying in, the fees you're paying to the juror, plus the like lost deposits from the people who are incoherent are all split among the people that are coherent. And moreover, there's an appeal mechanism so that if you have, sorry, people are still taking photos, I can go back. If you vote between say 3 jurors in the first round, and like I really believe Alice was right. The other people took the P plus epsilon attack. They voted for Bob. Then I can appeal. Anybody can appeal. Generally, technically that depends a little bit on case to case, but usually anybody can appeal, including the jurors. So they can put down a deposit. They can force a larger panel of jurors to make a decision, and people are incentivized to vote not with how their own panel voted, but how the last juror round in the ultimate appeal voted. So going back to the payoff table again briefly. So like all those lost deposits people are losing, they're split among the people in my voting round based on how the last voting round went. So if I'm the only person in my voting round that voted the right way, I get everybody's lost deposits. We call this the lone voice of reason jackpot. And it has the effect that in the most extreme case, if the attacker actually wants it to be a dominant strategy to always vote for the attack, they need to lock up enough so that any given one person is getting more than the lone voice of reason jackpot, because otherwise they would have at least like probabilistically some incentive to deviate, which means that because the lone voice of reason jackpot grows as the number of other players, because you're getting a lost deposit from each of them, or M-1 players, you need to give that to potentially each player. The total amount of money that the attacker has to lock up goes as M squared. And this extra square means that the deposit that the attacker has to lock up to be credible may grow faster than the entire supply of PNK, or faster than the total supply of staked tokens. So there are nuances here, and it's like, okay, like the attacker, this is to assume that the attacker wants it to be your like dominant strategy to vote for the attack. What if the attacker is willing to accept that like they'll give you a big enough bribe so that you vote like probabilistically in a mixed equilibrium, usually for the attack, not always. Like how big of a deposit do they need to like make you to vote like more than half the time for the attack? That's more complicated, but like it's also more complicated in the minds of jurors. So if you're trying to like convince people to like bribe, like give them this bribe to vote with you, and your argument is not, okay, like you're guaranteed you'll make it plus epsilon, instead it's, well, pick a randomized mixed strategy, and then like most of the time you'll come out ahead if you like vote with me on the like mixed strategy. It's a harder argument to make. So that adds at least some resistance to these kinds of attacks. It's interesting, I mentioned before that the 51% attack name came from the world of consensus algorithms. This is like, Kleros shares a basic payoff structure with consensus algorithms. These people who like looked at P plus epsilon attacks, they did so because they were worried about people having P plus epsilon attacks on Ethereum and Bitcoin themselves. So that's just sort of an interesting like side note, but also relevant for Kleros and decentralized justice in general. And now just to wrap up, so this is less of a type of an attack and more of a state of mind about what you should think of attacks. So what we call griefing. So this is also a term that was coined in a blog article by Vitalik Buterin, who's one of the co-founders of Ethereum. And that basically the idea is that sometimes your participants in your game will take losses upon themselves to harm others. They may act what appears to be irrationally in order to make life worse for others. The word comes from the language of video games, I believe, where like in online games, you sometimes get players that are just like trolling people, that are doing things that don't seem to be helping them at all. They just want to make life miserable for everybody else. He defines what he calls the griefing factor, which is essentially how much harm can you do for how much cost you take to yourself. And if your griefing factor is really big, that's a problem. Like if you can burn 1 pound and trash, cause like £1 million for other people of harm, like you're going to get some troll who's going to do that. If you have to take on £1 million loss to cause other people 1 pound of harm, probably nobody's going to do that. And then what you worry about, or what you can consider for any given mechanism in the world of, particularly like in general, but particularly in the world of cryptoeconomic blockchain mechanisms, is okay, like I'm analyzing my mechanism. What are the griefing factors? How much does somebody have to harm themselves to harm others? So we take this kind of point of view when we analyze Kleros, or you could do this for any mechanism in a decentralized space. In Kleros, like the big sort of notable grief is the delay grief. So we said that anybody can appeal, which means that you can just appeal frivolously. You can appeal to larger and larger and larger panels, which slows down the resolution time of the case by a fixed amount each time. Every time you have another appeal, there's like, you wait another week. And the system is designed so that because the number of jurors is growing exponentially, so is the cost to appeal. So the sort of like asymptotic griefing factor is like 1 over an exponential. So that's not so bad. Like if you appeal too many times, eventually it's going to become cost prohibitive and it will peter out. So you can, you can do this for basically any kind of grief. I guess I have enough time for this just to wrap up. Still on the idea of like people griefing, a common incentive for this, it's like, so why would anybody do this? Well, maybe they're just a troll. Maybe they have like external incentives that want them to manipulate the system or push other players out of the system. A particular like category of this is what's called discouragement attacks. I think Vitalik Buterin also wrote about this, where the idea is that if you have a game where everybody gains by participating honestly, but like if a dishonest deviant can cause losses on others, so like I take a loss because I deviated, and now like on like a Schelling point system, maybe it penalizes everybody if there's a disagreement, and because I disagree now, like everybody else is penalized too. And those other honest players, they're taking losses now. So eventually maybe they'll just leave the system, and I will be the only person left. I will, because the other players have been pushed out. I'll control the system once they're gone. So again, like Vitalik Buterin wrote about this, I think again in the context of blockchain consensus algorithms, where you're trying to like push people out of a blockchain mining game, but relevant for any kind of economic analysis in a decentralized space. Some of my research, I've looked at creating like kind of like a geometric perspective for griefs, where you have these kind of like phase diagrams, and you say, okay, like maybe I'll vary the griefing factor that people will grief at, and for each griefing factors, you sort of have a different game. Like you imagine, okay, say I have the same underlying base game. You're rewarded if you vote for A, you're penalized if you vote for B, but you have a grief who like an attack participant who's willing to take 1 pound of loss to themselves in exchange for 1 pound of harm. That's a somewhat like that is that is a game, and then you have a different game if the attacker is willing to do like 2 pounds of harm to themselves in exchange for 1 pound of harm to somebody else. So that like the equilibria of these games could be different, and you can analyze how they vary over like as you vary the griefs that people are willing to do, and you can kind of come up with this like diagram that says like, okay, like in this region I have these equilibria, in this region I have these equilibria, and ultimately this gives you sort of like tool to have like this sense of the total robustness of how close to the edge you are before you tip over the different equilibria. Okay, so those are pretty much all the like things I wanted to talk about. We're going to delve into some of these topics again on the different panels. But just to wrap up, like decentralized environments are very attack rich, and you have to be profoundly paranoid when you're designing mechanisms for this space. Like the first, like that should be your biggest priority is theorems about attack resistance, this is true for a variety of reasons, but like that at least like from my perspective that's like that is the mindset one has to have in this space, then also like these questions around like how do I draw people and how do they vote in decentralized justice systems? Well, voting, if you have more than two options, you have to like worry about like vote splitting, and you want to draw on like ideas from social choice theory. Drawing algorithms have historically been limited by the lack of good identity mechanisms, but that's getting better. They're still not perfect, and that opens up like a bigger space of the mechanisms you can have, where now that you can assume I have this like imperfect identity mechanism, what can I build now? Okay, so that's all. Do people have questions?
There's definitely maybe 2 questions before the coffee break.
Yep.
I'm curious, what types of disputes do you think these mechanisms are best suited to, or put differently, or other types of disputes that you think are less tractable to the mechanisms you've laid out?
Yeah, so really, I think anything that's sort of like small scale and doesn't make sense taken to a traditional justice system or traditional arbitration can make sense here. This is like a bargain form of dispute resolution, in my view, in that you can do this as Federico was arguing before, sort of at low cost. You don't need like this big institution coordinating people. They're sort of coordinating among each other, among themselves. This works across like international lines, which is like very complicated in a traditional setting. It's not going to be as rigorous as like going to a court in a country like the United Kingdom. So if I have like a really, really high value dispute, if I'm like a criminal trial or something, I probably want the court system. But you have these mostly good, although not as good as the the court system dispute resolution, in the cases that it didn't previously were just not being resolved at all. They weren't being taken into any kind of dispute resolution. Historically, for Kleros, I feel that our like user base has been this sort of like weird marriage between 2 groups. 1, people who actually have small scale disputes, and 2, crypto people that may have really large disputes, but for ideological reasons don't want to go to court. They want to use like a decentralized mechanism because they believe in decentralization. So that's, it's great for them. That works for that too. We've had a lot of, in recent months and years, we've had cases from like kind of existing, like kind of off-chain disputes, where companies that kind of want to use Kleros as an independent arbitrator for their like kind of customer service disputes. I think Federico's probably going to talk more about that later. There's an Argentinian crypto exchange called Lemon that is using Kleros as basically they give an opportunity to their users that if they're unhappy with a customer service claim as a resolution, they can have like another appeal to Kleros without giving up their opportunity to go to a real court later. It's binding. Lemon considers binding it on them, but not on the user. So there you having this kind of like transparent third party that's handled by the crowd is seen as something that's like a plus. That can be complemented to the traditional court system. But basically, any time that like it doesn't make sense to go to court, or like maybe you want like a first line of defense before you go to court for small scale disputes.
I've got a question about expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I understood it correctly from one of the earlier slides. There were kind of different courts depending on people's expertise. So my question is, how do you verify people's credentials, their expertise in a decentralized way? And what about non-experts? And I'm thinking of things like citizen assemblies and juries, where non-experts can be brought up to speed by experts. So, is that purely expert-based, or would there be opportunities for non-experts to come in and
That is an excellent question. So currently in version 1.0 of Kleros, we do not verify expertise. Instead, we rely on game theory. So there's an underlying like principle of much of this analysis, where the idea is that because you stake in these different courts and you're like penalized, rewarded based on how well you resolve the cases, if you're resolving poorly compared to your peers, you're losing money on average. So like if you stake into a court where you don't have the required expertise, you'll probably lose a lot of money and you'll eventually just unstake. So that is like the current model. This idea around soulbound tokens that I briefly mentioned on that we're going to like talk more about later, is the idea that like maybe you can actually verify people's expertise in a decentralized way, and then like how your soulbound tokens are awarded, it becomes the question, how do I get the soulbound token saying I'm an expert? You could do something similar to what we have for proof of humanity, where you submit yourself to a list, or instead of this, with proof of humanity, the like list says I'm a human being, but like maybe you can submit yourself to a list that says like I'm an expert in JavaScript. Here's my portfolio. Please verify me, decentralized community. So that might be available for some forms of expertise. Maybe it might make sense for others. Maybe like there are other possibilities as well, and then like the system can incorporate soulbound tokens from a lot of different ways. So in terms of like bringing up non-experts to speed, an interesting feature of version 1.0 of the court, and this will probably be true in future versions, is that the ultimate appeal, as you going back to my chart with the court tree. There we go. So the general court on top of the tree is the ultimate place where the like final appeals are determined, which is the least expert. The panels of people that have the least expertise that have just like general knowledge, which may seem strange that like if you have the panel of experts decided something, and I appeal to like the crowd, which does not experts. But that's important for 51% attack resistance. And that if you only have the experts as your pool of people that can judge a dispute, well, like that might not be a very large pool of people, so it might not be that very hard to take over the pool. So instead, in order to like take over the whole system, you have to like take over the general pool, but there people don't necessarily have expertise. And the sort of vision is that like there are policies on exactly how people should handle appeals, when should you just defer to the experts in the lower panel. Oh, you notice there's some kind of an attack, maybe, in which case like you try to like encourage the community to have like a discussion with the experts, they like inform the general court panel to eventually come up with the best ruling that they can.
Thank you, William. On griefing and the possibility of frivolous appeals, that the way that I see it, because my understanding of Kleros is that you can have an unlimited number of appeals, technically speaking. If someone were, a rogue actor were really intent to delay the process, I suppose they could, and that gets in the way of one of the major selling points of Kleros, which is the speed and immediacy of outcome. Is there any, what's the aggravation factor and how do you counter it? Do you have any way of stamping what are clearly frivolous appeals after, let's say, I don't know, a couple of rounds? Or do you have to let the process run its course and then therefore not really have control on what happens?
So currently the process just runs its course. The number of rounds is not, strictly speaking, unlimited. I think something like 8 or 9 total appeals are possible. This is a parameter that can be changed by the governance of the system. So they can increase the number of possible rounds up to infinity. With the idea being that like at a certain point, it's not useful to have a larger appeal because you're drawing the same people. There are only like a few hundred total people in the community of people like that are signed up to be Kleros jurors. And if you draw like 500 of them, like realistically you're drawing, you've probably drawn everybody, some of them with more than once, with multiplicity, because there's this whole thing around being able to be drawn more than once that I mentioned in the sort of version 1 voting system, or drawing system. So at a certain point, it's just not worthwhile having more appeals because you're not going to get anything more. So the system is parameterized around that. The largest, I think if you appeal in the courts that take the longest all the way to the last court, the total maximum time is like 5 months, which is a lot longer than the 1 or 2 weeks of that's the selling point of most cases, and most cases are only 1 or 2 weeks. It's the speed, when arguing for the speed of Kleros, the selling point is fast with an asterisk is usually fast. It's fast the vast majority of time, but it might be slow. But even if it's slow, it's still only months slow and not years slow. So one thing we've talked about in in Kleros 2.0. So Kleros 2.0, like the beta version is already launched, and the way the Kleros 2.0 works is that it's very modular. You can add things to it later. You can add new mechanisms. You can add new voting systems, new drawing systems. So when I talk about like, we might do this in 2.0, we might not do this in 2.0, basically I'm talking about like, have the modules been built yet or not? So the skeleton exists, but the modules haven't all been built and can continue to be built even based on new research we haven't had yet. One thing we've talked about that's not exactly like a priority, but it's been discussed, is to have a mechanism that cuts off your appeals not at the number of sort of like overall numbers. It's like, okay, you can appeal 8 times or whatever, but instead looks at the vote count and be like, okay, like this vote is overwhelming, we should just stop. Versus, okay, like this vote was still really close, like another appeal might be justified.
Let's have some coffee
Thanks. Happy to take questions, and coffee as well.
There will be plenty of you.